Shelves are boring. A horizontal surface attached to a vertical surface. And they're usually a rectangle, with good reason. The manufacturer doesn't know what you're going to put on it and in what orientation. But when you do know what you're going to put on it, that's when you can really start being creative. My starting material for this project is knotty alder, and it's pretty junky, so I'll have to address those knot holes down the road. A few extra steps, but for around $3 a board foot, I'm calling it worth it. This shelf is meant to hold my friend Alena's collection of higher-end Lego builds. So like I said, we do know what we want on it. We just need to work through the orientation. We played with the layout and landed on 2 shelves, one purely for Batman stuff and the other for cars. Once we were happy, I traced the outline onto some butcher paper. This won't be the final shape, rather a guideline for where everything would go. With that back in the shop, I can get some measurements for a couple glue ups and get to milling. This took some strategic cross-cutting to remove the super f***ed portions. Then I can joint 2 edges and rip the third one on the table saw. I'm not going to plane them yet, as I would rather do that after the glue up and after pouring epoxy in those knot holes. Out of clamps, the mating pieces get their miters cut with the help of a miter gauge, and I can now see where more material needs to be added with a few offcuts. The benefit of this alder is that it's light and soft, but those adjectives also mean that it will stain easily, so both sides get some shellac for protection. After cleaning up the knots, I'll tape the backside up and start pouring, and there were a lot of little voids to address. Though abundant, those holes hold a pretty small volume of epoxy, so tape worked fine except one spot. That's okay though, it gives me a chance to show exactly why you should put Formica on your workbench. Now I'm ready to plane, which not only flattens the pieces but cleans up the epoxy on top. My planer started shooting out chips all of a sudden, and I knew my bin wasn't full, which means it's time for a thorough filter cleaning, which I've been neglecting as you can see. I'm going to simply glue those long miters and shoot in one nail while it dries, as the corner gets cut off anyway. I have a plan to reinforce the joint a little later. With the amendment pieces glued on, I can turn my attention back to the templates. First thing is to use a different color to make the lines more flowy and make the curves more attractive. Then I can cut that out, tape it down to my shelf blanks, and trace the new profile. I would have preferred the bandsaw for this cut, but it would have been too awkward there. So the slower but safer jigsaw removed the bulk of the material. Now I need some vertical supports, so I ripped a few pieces, cross-cut them to length, and drew on some guidelines to make the ends look more interesting. I tried to place all my cuts to have as few knots to fix as possible, but I couldn't get them all, so more shellac and more epoxy, which gave me an opportunity to go for round 2 on the main shelf panels. More decorative features, I'll tilt my blade to about 25 degrees and rip the edge of the vertical supports and clean the edges with the disc sander. Now's a good time to cut those corners off with the nail in it, which will give the piece a better chance of sitting flat against both walls. I forgot I need to make the miter reinforcing pieces, so I cut 45s onto 4 sides of a couple blocks, making some gold bar looking parts. Last thing to make are some triangles for added shelf support. Rip, crosscut, bandsaw, sand. Since I have to wait 24 hours after each epoxy pour, I'll continue to be productive and put finish on those triangles and see what kind of pieces I can harvest from this Lego base to become plugs to hide the eventual mounting hardware. The next day I'll shape the panel with the random orbital sander on the convex portions, the spindle sander for the concave, and then by hand to refine the final shape. Then we'll take it through the grits, stopping at 120 to put a roundover on top and a chamfer on bottom, and finishing at 180. Of course I'll have to go back to hand sanding to get rid of the burn marks and those little grooves where 2 passes of the jigsaw meet. Now I can glue on those gold bars and screw them in with a 1/2-inch hole for a later plug. The Lego pieces get transferred to the vertical supports, and I'll set my router to carve down just to the thickness of the Lego minus the nubs. The majority of the waste is removed, and I'll finish up with a chisel. To assemble, I'll glue the piece in place so I can flip it over and drill out more 1/2-inch holes before screwing it together. Another offcut becomes a new home for plugs. Using a plug cutter ends up looking better as you get face grain showing rather than in grain that you would with a dowel. I've seen people essentially resaw a piece on the bandsaw to free the plugs, but I find that a little wiggle with the screwdriver works just as quickly as setting up the cut on the bandsaw. Those get glued in place, hammered home, cut off flush, and sanded smooth. Now I can put the triangles in place with wood glue on the face grain to face grain connection and some nails from the back of the vertical supports for the end grain. Before taking it over to install, I'll give it all a coat of Osmo. I debated on which finish to use here since a shelf can live in both worlds, heavy use or almost never even touched. Like a small shelf that you throw your keys on every day, you might want to go for a more durable poly. Since this is really display only, I chose Osmo. Install was straightforward. Screw into the studs, pop on the Lego hardware covers, and use the reference picture to set it all up. Thanks for watching, and screw rectangles.